The morning air in Boulder was sharper than usual, as if winter had set its teeth against the quiet world. A pale fog clung low to the ground, wrapping the silent street in secrecy. Rachel Harper, 52, stood in the parking lot of Boulder Community Rescue, fumbling with the heavy iron key at the shelter's side door. Her hands, dry and cracked from years of working in animal rescue, trembled just enough to betray the tension she carried everywhere. She took a breath, braced herself for the usual chaos inside. Pounding paws, the echo of hopeful barking, the metallic scent of disinfectant. But this morning, something was off. A cardboard box sat pressed against the door, the edges soggy, a damp patch seeping across the concrete. The only sound, a soft, high-pitched whimper, desperate and muffled. Rachel's heart thumped. Not again, she thought. Not another one. She dropped to her knees, her jeans soaking up the dew, and reached for the box with both hands. The flaps were taped shut, the corners ripped and stained, a bitter scent of urine and fear rising up. She pried the tape loose, then froze. Inside, barely visible, was a puppy. A white German shepherd, eyes covered by a torn black scarf tied tight enough to leave a dent around his head. Rachel's breath caught. She reached out, fingers clumsy, and untied the knot with shaking hands. The scarf fell away. The puppy's eyes opened, wide and unblinking, clouded with confusion but shining underneath with something, fear, hope. His paws were raw and bloody, pressed against the coarse cardboard, trembling with pain. "Hey there, sweetheart," Rachel whispered, voice breaking on the words. "It's okay now. You're safe. I promise." Her jaw clenched hard as she inspected him. He looked about 4 months old, his fur dirty and matted. The scar around his neck from the knot stood out, angry and red. She called out for help, voice wavering. But the shelter was still empty except for her echo and this tiny broken soul. The air felt thick as she carefully lifted him out, his body rigid at first, then limp with exhaustion. A volunteer arrived, startled by the scene. Rachel just shook her head, no words yet. The big question, why would someone do this? Who could leave a puppy, blindfolded, alone in the cold, like trash? The mystery hung in the air like fog, unsolvable, at least for now. As Rachel cradled him against her chest, the first rays of sun broke through the clouds, slicing across the parking lot and landing, just for a second, on her and the puppy. It felt like a signal, a sign that hope, however small, could survive even here. She glanced down at the puppy's face. He blinked once, slowly, then held her gaze with quiet intensity. Rachel's mind raced. Should she let herself get attached, risk the pain of losing another one? After all the heartbreak, all the failures, dogs that didn't make it, homes that turned out to be nightmares, she had built up walls so thick she barely recognized her own heart anymore. But as the puppy pressed his nose into her collarbone, silent and still, she made a choice. She wouldn't let him be another case file, another tragedy. This one was different. Maybe they could save each other. She carried him inside, past rows of empty kennels, her footsteps echoing on the linoleum. The shelter was quiet, shadows shifting along the walls, the promise of another day beginning. She laid the puppy, Dexter she decided, the name just coming to her, on a warm towel in the exam room. The sharp smell of blood and cardboard still lingered as she sat beside him, her hand hovering just above his head. She didn't touch him yet, didn't want to scare him. Instead, she just sat, watching the slow, shaky rise and fall of his chest. Her own loneliness, always present, ached sharper than ever, mirrored in the small, silent creature beside her. There were no answers yet, just questions. Why did someone go to such lengths to hide this dog's eyes from the world? What had Dexter seen or done that was so unforgivable? And why, after everything, did his silent, trusting gaze make Rachel feel, for the first time in months, that she was right where she belonged? She stayed until the sun was fully up, the fog burning away from the streets outside. Dexter, finally relaxing, let his head drop and his eyes flutter shut. Rachel let out a slow breath, the tiniest glimmer of hope flaring in her chest. Maybe this time things could be different. Maybe this time neither of them would be left behind. The shelter's tiny exam room was never meant to hold this much tension. The fluorescent light flickered as Rachel and Dr. Owen, the shelter's graying vet, hovered over Dexter's trembling body. Rachel tried to keep her hand steady, one palm resting lightly on Dexter's side, feeling the rapid thud of his tiny heart. Every movement, every glance, Dexter flinched. When Dr. Owen leaned in to check his paws, Dexter yelped softly, scrabbling backwards until his back hit the wall. "He's been through hell," Dr. Owen muttered, voice tight. He gently lifted each paw, examining the raw, split pads. "These wounds aren't fresh. He's been running for days, maybe weeks. Look at the mark around his neck. Chained maybe, or roped." The doctor's tone was calm, but his frown deepened with every detail. Whoever did this didn't care if he lived or died. Rachel fought to keep her own anger from spilling out. She wanted to scream, to demand answers from a world that never gave them. Instead, she forced her attention to the practical: clean gauze, a soft touch, a bowl of water. Dexter only drank when Rachel looked away, every small sound making him jump. A volunteer, Maria, new to the team, eyes wide with worry, burst into the room, waving a piece of crumpled paper. "This was taped to the box," she said, thrusting it at Rachel. The note was scrawled in thick, angry handwriting. "He runs too much. No one wants him." Rachel's hands shook as she read it. She wanted to rip the note in half, but her rage caught in her throat. She pressed the paper flat on the counter, staring at the words until they blurred. "Runs too much," she whispered, her voice cracking. "As if that's a reason to abandon a living soul." Dexter cowered in the corner watching her, his tail tucked tight. Maria, cheeks flushed, pulled up security footage from the shelter's battered laptop. The grainy black and white video flickered to life, Dexter, blindfolded and lost, wandering up and down the empty sidewalk in the pre-dawn hours. The footage showed him slumping at the shelter's door, circling and lying down, then standing, then collapsing in exhaustion, again and again, for hours, as if waiting for someone who would never come. Rachel watched, jaw clenched. "He's not running away," she said softly. "He's looking for something." A sudden gasp from another volunteer, Mason, broke the silence. "Wait, I've heard about this dog," he blurted. "Some folks on my street said there was a white puppy always breaking loose, running through yards, getting chased off. People called him Ghost Dog." Rachel's mind raced. She pressed for more. Had anyone seen where Dexter came from? Mason nodded. "He'd show up near the old Bennett house. Place looks abandoned, but I think someone was squatting there for a while. I heard people yelling at him to get out. I think they hurt him." Dr. Owen listened, expression grim. "That would explain the scars. He probably broke loose and kept coming back, hoping someone would finally let him in." Rachel felt a stab of guilt. How many times had they missed him? How many nights had Dexter run through the cold, just trying to survive? She crouched beside him, letting him sniff her hand, voice barely above a whisper. "You kept coming back. You wanted to be found." Dexter didn't move. His eyes darted, desperate for safety. Rachel's thoughts turned inward, her own failures, the adoptions that hadn't worked out, the dogs that didn't make it. She had built walls for a reason. Yet here she was, already caring more than she wanted to admit. Rachel's phone buzzed, a call from the rescue network. Another clue. Someone had seen a white German shepherd pup fleeing the old Bennett place, chased by a man in a torn jacket. More pieces of the puzzle, but no clear picture. Rachel scribbled everything down in her worn-out notebook, determined not to let Dexter's story end in silence. Later that afternoon, as Dexter lay curled on a blanket, Rachel sat on the cold tile floor and watched the winter sunlight creeping across the room. She felt the weight of a decision pressing on her chest. She'd promised herself not to foster again, not after the last heartbreak, not after losing Buddy, but as she watched Dexter's slow, shallow breaths, saw the way his ears flicked every time she moved, she knew she couldn't walk away. "I'll do it," she announced to the team, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I'll foster him, just until he's ready." No one argued. Maria smiled, Mason gave a quiet thumbs up, and Dr. Owen just nodded, his relief visible. Rachel picked up Dexter, holding him close, whispering that he was safe now. For a moment, Dexter's body softened. A shaft of morning light caught his face. His eyes, no longer hidden, shimmered in the golden glow. His tail, barely perceptible, twitched, just once. As Rachel carried Dexter out of the exam room and into the shelter's front office, she glanced at the note one last time before tossing it in the trash. She whispered, more to herself than to anyone else, "We're not giving up. Not this time." Outside, the fog was beginning to lift. Rachel felt a strange mix of hope and fear. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could help Dexter find a new life. Fear that, like so many before, it would all fall apart. But as Dexter pressed his cold nose against her wrist, a tiny flicker of trust passed between them. It was enough to start, maybe enough for both of them to try again. The drive home was silent, the only sound the low hum of Rachel's old Subaru and Dexter's shallow, nervous breathing in the back seat. Rachel kept glancing at him in the mirror, afraid that at any second he'd bolt or cower. But he just sat, statue still, eyes wide, legs trembling with every turn. The streets of Boulder slipped past in streaks of white and gray, bare trees scratching the sky, front yards dusted with ice. Rachel's heart ached for the tiny figure huddled in her car. She tried to hum softly, some lullaby from her childhood, but the words caught in her throat. The quiet between them was heavy, thick with things neither could say. Her house, a weathered two-story with blue paint chipping from the porch, stood at the edge of a sleepy street. Rachel parked, exhaled, and took a moment to steel herself. The last time she'd brought a dog home, she'd sworn it would be the last. The pain of losing Buddy, her old mutt, had left the house hollow and shadowed, her life quieter than she'd ever wanted. She opened the door, Dexter in her arms, his body rigid as a board. The familiar smells, cinnamon from last night's tea, the faint must of old books, the ghostly memory of Buddy's fur, welcomed her in. But Dexter didn't seem to notice. He squirmed free as soon as his paws touched the worn wooden floor, pacing in tight, anxious circles. He sniffed every corner, his nails clicking on the boards, flinching at every creak of the house. Rachel let him explore, following at a respectful distance. The living room was still set the way it had been before her divorce, a sagging brown couch facing a cold, unused fireplace, a faded red blanket draped over one armrest. Rachel dropped her bag and flicked on the lamp, spilling a warm glow over Dexter's white fur. But Dexter avoided the couch, avoided the rug, instead slinking over to a shadowy corner, her old reading spot, now piled with boxes and unopened mail. He curled himself into a tight ball, watching Rachel with wary eyes. Rachel sat on the edge of the couch, careful not to look at him too directly. The TV remote sat on the coffee table, dusty and forgotten. She picked it up, turned on the screen, then hit mute. Scenes flickered across the screen, people talking, laughing, living lives Rachel barely recognized anymore. She left the volume off, afraid the sound might spook Dexter, afraid that noise might shatter the fragile peace that had settled over the room. As evening crept in, Rachel moved about her routines, keeping her movements slow and her voice soft. She filled a bowl with water, set it near Dexter, and left a few treats on a small plate. Dexter sniffed them, nose twitching, but didn't eat. He watched her, unblinking, every muscle tight. Rachel's hand hovered above his back for a long moment, wanting to comfort him, but she stopped herself, afraid she might scare him, or worse, remind him of hands that had hurt instead of helped. Rachel retreated to the kitchen, made herself tea, and stood by the window staring out into the growing dark. The loneliness that had settled over her life since the divorce pressed in on all sides. It felt like she and Dexter were two shadows, each afraid of breaking the other's silence. Hours slipped by. Rachel tried reading, then scrolling her phone, but her attention kept drifting back to the small white figure huddled in the corner. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but the fear of rejection, his and hers, kept her frozen. It was like staring at her own reflection years ago, right after she'd packed up the last of her ex's things. The memory stung. She realized that she and Dexter were both living with wounds they couldn't name. Eventually, exhaustion won out. Rachel set a sleeping bag on the living room floor, a few feet from Dexter, and settled in. The room was filled with the soft hush of her breathing and the distant rattle of pipes. She didn't sleep right away. Instead, she watched Dexter, his eyes glinting in the darkness, ears perked, body still tense. She spoke softly, more to herself than to him. "It's okay, Dexter. I'm right here. You don't have to be afraid." She didn't expect a response, but after a long, tense moment, Dexter shifted. He uncurled slowly, his head drooping, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Rachel's heart skipped. She stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, as Dexter inched closer, drawn by the warmth of her presence. He didn't touch her, didn't even reach out, but after a few minutes, he lay down parallel to her, close enough that she could hear his soft, ragged breaths. Rachel stared at the ceiling, fighting back tears. For the first time in months, she felt the flicker of something she thought she'd lost. Hope. Not the big, world-changing kind, but a small, stubborn hope that maybe things could change. That maybe, if she and Dexter could find comfort in each other's company, there was a way forward. Sometime after midnight, Rachel glanced at the dark window and caught her own reflection. Tired, uncertain, but softer than before. She reached out, her hand hovering once again over Dexter's side. This time, she let it fall gently, letting her fingers rest in the air above his back, offering comfort if he wanted it. Dexter finally closed his eyes, his breathing deepening. Rachel listened to his soft breaths, mingling with her own. The silence between them was no longer heavy with fear. It was filled with the possibility of healing, one slow night at a time. And for the first time in years, Rachel didn't feel alone. The next morning, Rachel woke to the faint warmth of sunlight spilling across the floorboards and the soft, steady sound of Dexter's breathing. He was still curled in his corner, but his body looked less rigid, his face more relaxed in sleep. Rachel lay there for a moment, letting herself believe that maybe last night wasn't just a fluke, that maybe she hadn't imagined the tentative trust that had settled between them in the darkness. She moved quietly, not wanting to break the fragile peace. She made coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, and toasted 2 slices of bread. She left a corner of the toast on a napkin near Dexter, careful to set it far enough away that he could approach at his own pace. Then she sat at the kitchen table, watching from a distance, not wanting to intrude on his cautious world. Dexter lifted his head at the sound of the toaster, ears twitching. He eyed the toast, nose twitching, but waited until Rachel looked away before creeping forward. He sniffed the bread, then took it gently, chewing as quietly as he could. Rachel smiled into her coffee cup, letting him have his small victory. Over the next few days, Rachel worked to create gentle, predictable routines. She spoke in a soft voice, moved slowly, and made sure not to startle him with sudden noises. She played calming music in the mornings, old jazz records, the kind her father used to listen to, and let the sound fill the house in place of words. She kept the TV off, the house quiet except for the hum of daily life and Dexter's soft footsteps. Each day, she and Dexter ventured a little further together. At first, just to the backyard, Rachel kneeling in the cold grass while Dexter sniffed the air, ever watchful for any sign of danger. The world outside seemed to overwhelm him, a distant car door slamming, the laughter of children on a nearby street, even the rustle of wind through the fence. But little by little, Dexter began to trust the safety of Rachel's presence. He'd stand just behind her, leaning into her legs, letting her shield him from the world. Inside, Rachel watched him carefully, making mental notes of the things that made him anxious. The metallic clatter of her keys, the high-pitched ring of the microwave timer, the flicker of a shadow across the window. She wrote her observations in a battered old journal, alongside half-finished poems and grocery lists. Sometimes, her entries slipped into memories of her own childhood dog, a golden retriever named Cody, who'd slept at her feet during thunderstorms and barked at the mailman every afternoon. Rachel wondered if Dexter, like her, still carried echoes of those old wounds. If the comfort they both craved was the same, the steady presence of someone who wouldn't leave, no matter how rough the day. There were setbacks, of course. One afternoon, as Rachel folded laundry, she dropped a heavy stack of towels and Dexter bolted, claws scrambling on the wood, heart hammering as he wedged himself behind the couch. Rachel waited, kneeling nearby, whispering soothing words until he finally peeked out, eyes wide and glassy. She didn't force him to come out. She just sat there, letting him take his time, her patience a silent promise. Progress came in small, quiet moments. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Rachel stretched out on the living room rug, reading an old mystery novel. Dexter watched her from his usual spot, paws tucked beneath his chest. After a long while, he stood, stretched, and made his way across the room, his nails clicking on the floor. He stopped, uncertain, and looked at her with a question in his eyes. Rachel didn't move, barely even breathed. She felt her heart thumping in her chest. Slowly, Dexter inched forward, then placed his paw, light as a feather, on Rachel's outstretched hand. She let out a shaky exhale, tears stinging her eyes. For the first time, Dexter had reached out to her. It was a breakthrough, the kind of moment Rachel would replay in her mind for days. She felt something shift inside her, a crack opening in the walls she'd built. She realized that Dexter was seeking comfort in the same way she was, by reaching for someone who might understand the pain of being left behind. From then on, the house no longer felt quite so empty. The silence was punctuated by Dexter's gentle breathing, his paws padding across the floor, the quiet rhythm of a new life settling in. At night, Rachel would find him closer to her sleeping bag, sometimes even daring to rest his head near her feet. And every time she wrote in her journal, she found herself including Dexter in her dreams for the future. Maybe one day he'll run in the park without fear. Maybe one day we'll both forget what it's like to be alone. She thought about second chances, how hard they were to believe in, and how precious they became once you let them in. Dexter, for all his scars and skittishness, was beginning to trust her. And in turn, Rachel found herself daring to trust again, letting her own heart soften. One evening, just before bed, Dexter nudged his way onto the rug beside her and pressed his body against her leg. Rachel reached down, her hand trembling, and stroked his soft fur. Dexter closed his eyes, letting out a sigh so deep it seemed to come from somewhere far beyond the little house. The silence that followed was no longer the silence of fear or loss. It was the quiet of two souls beginning to heal together. For the first time since Buddy's death, Rachel felt the possibility of home returning, not as a place, but as a feeling, a fragile, hopeful bond, slowly growing stronger in the gentle dark. The days blurred into each other in gentle, familiar rhythms. Rachel's house began to feel different, softer, lighter, the corners no longer haunted by shadows, but by hope, by the soft footfalls of Dexter learning to trust the world again. She found herself humming as she washed dishes, chatting with Dexter as she folded laundry, laughing when he would cock his head at her stories as if he really understood. The little victories stacked up, Dexter wagging his tail when Rachel came home, accepting treats from her palm, curling up on the rug while she read. Sometimes, when the afternoon light poured in through the living room window, he would doze off, his legs twitching as if chasing something in a dream. Each day, Rachel wrote careful notes in her journal, tracking every milestone and setback. She felt a cautious optimism blooming inside her, one she barely dared to name. And then, one Sunday morning, she decided to take a risk. The neighborhood park was alive with the shrieks of children and the calls of dogs playing fetch. Rachel gripped Dexter's leash tightly as they walked along the trail, her heart beating with equal parts excitement and anxiety. The park had a large, well-fenced dog run, a place she'd avoided until now. But Dexter had been doing so well, she wanted to believe he was ready. She crouched beside him at the gate, brushing her hand through his white fur. "It's safe, Dex," she murmured. "You're okay. We're just going to try." Dexter looked up at her with those deep, searching eyes, ears flicked forward, tail swaying. Rachel unclipped the leash, heart in her throat, and let him go. For a split second, Dexter hesitated, one paw raised, uncertain. Then, as if some hidden wire snapped, he bolted, not with the joyful abandon of a dog set free, but with desperate, unstoppable speed. He raced the length of the fence, nose to the ground, zigzagging back and forth. Rachel called his name, her voice tight with panic, but he didn't look back. Rachel's heart pounded. She broke into a run, stumbling over wood chips and dodging a boy with a golden retriever. Dexter shot to the far corner of the dog run, squeezed through a gap under the chain link, and was gone in a flash of white fur and panic. Rachel nearly screamed. She sprinted to the fence, saw Dexter's collar caught on a sharp wire, dangling uselessly. Her hands shook as she pulled it free. She whirled around, scanning the street, the fields beyond the park, her mind filling with dread. "Dexter!" she shouted, voice cracking. "Dexter, come back!" Her world spun. Fear gnawed at her. Fear not just of losing Dexter, but of failing him, of letting her hope die on a sunny morning with kids laughing nearby, oblivious to her heartbreak. She ran along the perimeter, breath burning in her lungs, calling his name over and over. No answer. No flash of white in the underbrush. The sun rose higher. People stared. Rachel didn't care. All she could see was Dexter's terrified face as he ran. She fumbled for her phone, calling the shelter, her friends, anyone she could think of. "Dexter's missing," she gasped. "If anyone sees him, please, please call me." Her hands shook as she hung up, her vision blurry with tears. The hours dragged by. Rachel circled the neighborhood, stopping at every yard, every porch. She questioned joggers, bicyclists, dog walkers, anyone who might have seen a white shepherd running loose. Most just shook their heads or shrugged. Some offered sympathy, but Rachel barely heard them. As the afternoon faded, Rachel felt her hope slipping. She sat on the curb outside the park, Dexter's collar clutched tight in her fist. Guilt gnawed at her. Why did she trust so soon? Why wasn't she more careful? Had she misread the signals, pushed Dexter too fast? The old, familiar ache of failure settled in her chest. She buried her face in her hands, feeling the weight of all the dogs she hadn't been able to save. A gentle tap on her shoulder startled her. It was Mr. Kim, her next-door neighbor, holding a sack of groceries. His eyes were kind, his voice soft. "Rachel, I think I saw your dog," he said quietly. "Not long ago, heading towards the rescue shelter. Looked scared, but determined. You should check there." Rachel's heart leapt, a flicker of hope against the darkness. She scrambled to her feet, thanked Mr. Kim, and raced to her car. The drive to the shelter felt endless, every red light a test of her patience, every minute stretching longer than the last. She replayed Mr. Kim's words over and over. Heading to the shelter. Why? Was Dexter seeking safety, or just lost and running in circles? As she pulled into the empty parking lot, dusk settling over Boulder, Rachel's eyes scanned the building, desperate for any sign of movement. Then she saw him. A flash of white fur curled up against the glass doors of the shelter, just like that first morning. She parked haphazardly, not even bothering to lock her car. She ran to the door, her voice shaking as she called his name, softer now, almost a prayer. "Dexter, it's me. I'm here." Dexter looked up, his body pressed tight against the door, eyes wide with fear but flickering with recognition. Rachel knelt, heart pounding, tears threatening. She pressed her palm to the glass, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "I'm sorry, Dex. I'm so sorry." Inside, Dexter didn't move for a moment. Then, slowly, he stood and pressed his nose to the glass where her hand rested. Rachel stayed there, on her knees, until a volunteer let her in. When the door opened, Dexter darted to her side, pressing against her legs, trembling. Rachel wrapped her arms around him, letting the relief and sorrow mix together. She promised herself she would never take his trust for granted again. For the first time, she understood. Dexter wasn't running away. He was running to the only place he'd ever felt safe. He was running home. The shelter's parking lot was washed in the bruised blue and gold of dusk. Rachel held Dexter close, feeling the tremor in his body, a silent language of apology, relief, and old fear. She pressed her cheek to his head, murmuring, "You're okay. You're safe, Dexter. You're home." The familiar hum of the shelter, usually a backdrop for chaos and heartbreak, felt different tonight. It felt like sanctuary. Inside, the front desk lights flickered on as shelter volunteers began their evening rounds. Mason was sweeping near the entrance. Maria, clipboard in hand, raised her brows when she saw Rachel, Dexter clinging to her side. The whole team was invested in Dexter's progress. Mason dropped his broom and hurried over. "You found him," he said, breathless. "He came right to the door about an hour ago. Wouldn't let anyone near, just sat there, staring inside like he was waiting." Rachel managed a shaky smile. She knelt to meet Dexter's eyes, feeling the ache in her knees. "That's because he was waiting. For me. For us." Maria knelt too, her voice gentle. "Rachel, you have to see this. We got a delivery earlier, and the driver said he's seen Dexter before, around the old house on Benson Street. Said he saw kids throwing rocks at him, yelling for him to leave. Sometimes he'd hide under the steps, shivering. The driver tried to coax him over, but Dexter just ran, always circling back to this place." Rachel's jaw tightened. Anger and sadness tangled in her chest. The puzzle pieces of Dexter's life came together. A string of failed escapes, cruelty, fear, and yet always this need to come back. She crouched lower, meeting Dexter's gaze. "You knew where to go when things got bad, didn't you?" she whispered. Dexter's ears twitched, and for the first time he inched forward and licked her hand, the briefest brush of his tongue, a shy, grateful gesture. Rachel's breath caught. They sat together on the cold concrete, Dexter's body pressed into her side. Rachel's mind raced through the mistakes she'd made, trusting too soon, risking too much. But she also realized the truth. Dexter wasn't searching for escape. He was searching for safety, for someone to stay. The volunteers lingered nearby, quiet and watchful. Mason fetched a blanket, draping it over Rachel's shoulders. Maria set down a bowl of water and a plate of leftover chicken. Dexter sniffed, then took a few cautious bites, never straying far from Rachel's hand. The evening settled around them, soft and forgiving. Rachel didn't rush to take him home. Instead, she let the moment stretch. Let Dexter feel what it meant to be wanted. A delivery van rumbled down the street, headlights sweeping across the parking lot. Dexter tensed, but Rachel kept her hand steady, murmuring, "No one's going to hurt you here." She glanced at her reflection in the shelter's glass doors. Dexter's pale fur, her tired face, the weight of the day hanging between them. For a brief second, she saw not just a lost dog and a woman trying to heal, but two survivors learning the shape of trust. As the sky darkened, Rachel found herself remembering her first days after the divorce, the sense of drifting, the desperate need for a place to belong. She understood Dexter's instinct to run, to keep returning to the only place that ever felt safe. They were more alike than she wanted to admit. By midnight, the shelter was quiet. Rachel's hands were numb, but she stayed outside, Dexter curled at her feet. She whispered stories into his fur, memories of her childhood, tales of Buddy, promises she was still scared to make. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Not this time. You're not alone anymore." At some point, Dexter leaned against her so hard she nearly toppled. She laughed, her first real laugh in weeks, and let him rest his head in her lap. A thin crescent moon rose over the roofline, painting their small world in silver. In that hush, Mason brought out 2 steaming mugs of tea. He settled on the steps beside them, handing one to Rachel. "You know," he said quietly, "he always comes back here, no matter what happens. It's like he's got a map inside his heart, and this place is marked home." Rachel sipped her tea, feeling the truth of those words. She stroked Dexter's head, her touch gentle, almost reverent. "Maybe we're both just trying to find our way back," she admitted. "And maybe this is it." Later, when she finally stood to go, Dexter followed without hesitation. Inside the shelter, Rachel tucked him into a familiar kennel with his favorite blanket. He curled up, tail thumping once, and watched her with tired but peaceful eyes. Rachel promised herself that from now on, she'd listen to what Dexter was trying to tell her, not just with words, but with the silent persistence of a soul refusing to give up. As Rachel turned out the lights, she looked back one last time. Dexter was already asleep, the rise and fall of his chest, steady and strong. Rachel felt something shift inside her, a sense of belonging, fragile but real, like a seed finally breaking ground after a long, cold winter. Outside, dawn's first light was just beginning to soften the sky. Rachel lingered at the door, Dexter's presence a quiet reassurance behind her. Home, she realized, wasn't a place you found. It was a place you chose, again and again, every time you risked your heart. And for Dexter, for herself, for the battered hope that lived between them, Rachel was finally ready to choose. The next week, Rachel couldn't get Dexter's past out of her mind. She found herself lying awake at night, replaying the delivery driver's words, the image of Dexter shivering under the steps while kids threw stones. She knew she owed him more than comfort and routine. She owed him the truth. On a cold Thursday morning, Rachel and Mason set out for the old Bennett house. The neighborhood was quieter than she remembered. Abandoned cars rusting in driveways, lawns choked with weeds, boarded-up windows staring blankly at the street. Dexter sat in the back seat, pressed against the door, watching the world pass by with those wide, haunted eyes. As they pulled up, he whined softly, his whole body trembling. Rachel got out first, heart pounding. The yard was littered with broken toys, a cracked tricycle, the battered remains of a doghouse. She opened Dexter's door, but didn't force him out. "Only if you want to," she whispered. After a moment, Dexter followed, staying close to her legs, his movements cautious but curious. The house itself was empty, windows smashed, front door hanging off its hinges. Inside, the smell of mold and old garbage stung Rachel's nose. She could almost feel the memories pressing in from the walls, angry voices, slammed doors, the metallic tang of fear. Dexter stopped at the threshold, nose twitching, tail low. They circled the house, moving slowly. In the overgrown backyard, Rachel noticed a patch of dirt worn bare beneath a tree, a heavy chain still looped around the trunk. Dexter stared at the spot, his breathing ragged. Rachel's chest ached. She knelt, running her fingers through the chain's rusted links. "I'm so sorry, Dex," she whispered. "No one should have to live like this." A neighbor, Mrs. Goldman, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a gentle manner, peeked over the fence. She watched Rachel for a moment, then called out, "Are you looking for that white pup? I remember him. He was chained up for days at a time. Heard him whimpering at night, poor thing. Sometimes the man inside would scream at him, especially when it rained." Rachel listened, jaw clenched in anger. "Did anyone ever help?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Mrs. Goldman shook her head. "We tried, but they'd move him, hide him inside. Then one day he just disappeared." "I hoped someone good had found him." Rachel thanked her, then turned back to Dexter. She realized the depth of his wounds, the way he flinched at every raised voice, the instinct to run and run but always come back to the only place that ever offered safety. Tears stung her eyes as she pulled Dexter close, pressing her face into his fur. "I promise you," she whispered fiercely, "you'll never have to come back here again. You're safe now. I'll always listen. I'll always protect you." Dexter seemed to understand. He nuzzled her side, his body relaxing, the trust between them becoming something solid and real. Mason snapped a few photos for the shelter's records, but mostly kept his distance, letting Rachel and Dexter have their moment. On the drive back, Rachel stayed quiet, one hand resting on Dexter's back. She thought about all the times she'd doubted his running, thought he was escaping, not searching. The guilt was heavy, but she let it settle, let it become a lesson she wouldn't forget. That night, Dexter surprised her. As Rachel finished brushing her teeth, she walked into her bedroom to find him already curled at the foot of her bed, head resting on her faded quilt. She stopped in the doorway, startled but moved. All this time Dexter had slept near her, but never with her, not until now. She slid under the covers, careful not to disturb him. For a long time she listened to the quiet rhythm of his breathing, the sound more comforting than any lullaby. She realized then this was a new chapter for both of them, not just survival, but true belonging, a bond chosen, not forced. In the early hours of the morning, a thunderstorm rolled through Boulder, rattling the windows. Rachel woke with a start, her old fears stirring, but Dexter didn't run. Instead, he scooted closer, pressing his nose against her hand. She stroked his fur, whispering words of comfort neither of them truly needed anymore. Rachel made a silent vow, etched deep inside. She would never let Dexter down. Whatever darkness he carried, she would carry with him. They would heal together. Over the next few days, Rachel noticed subtle changes in Dexter. He seemed lighter, more at ease. He greeted visitors at the shelter with cautious optimism, not fear. He wagged his tail for Mason, accepted treats from Maria, and let children pet him gently when families visited. The staff called it a miracle, but Rachel knew better. It was hard-won trust, a healing that grew from patience, presence, and love. One afternoon, Rachel sat on her porch, writing in her journal. Dexter sprawled across her feet. She looked at the sky, felt the breeze on her face, and realized that, for the first time in years, she was happy. Not the brittle happiness of pretending, but the real thing, grounded in the knowledge that she and Dexter had survived together. She closed her journal and bent down, burying her face in Dexter's fur. "Thank you," she whispered, "for coming back, for choosing me." Dexter looked up, eyes gentle, as if to say, "Thank you for listening." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky with colors Rachel had almost forgotten she knew, whatever came next, they would face it side by side. A few weeks passed, each day a layer of frost melting from both Rachel and Dexter's hearts. The shelter thrived in the gentle chaos of spring, new arrivals, fresh beginnings, hope on every leash. Rachel and Dexter slipped into their routines like they'd always belonged to each other. Still, Rachel knew what came next. Every foster, no matter how loved, faced the same question. Would this be their forever home? One bright Saturday, the shelter buzzed with visitors. Word had spread about Dexter, the white shepherd who'd survived so much and still greeted people with quiet courage. That morning, the Walsh family arrived, a couple in their 30s and their daughter Hannah, who wore thick glasses and clung to her mother's hand. Rachel watched as Hannah peeked shyly over her father's shoulder at the cluster of barking dogs, her eyes searching for someone safe. Rachel's heart beat faster when Maria called her over. The Walshes are interested in Dexter. They lost their old dog last year. Hannah hasn't spoken to another dog since. Maria's voice dropped, a note of hope and warning mingling. This could be good for both of them. But, are you ready? Rachel nodded, feeling a rush of nerves and pride. She called Dexter, who padded over and sat by her feet, gazing up as if reading her thoughts. She led him into the play yard, where the Walshes waited. Hannah shrank behind her parents, hands knotted in her sweater. Rachel crouched, gentle. This is Dexter. He's a little shy, too. Dexter sat, ears tilted back. He didn't bolt. Instead, he waited, eyes soft and patient. Slowly, Hannah edged forward, one trembling hand outstretched. Dexter lowered his head, breathing her scent, then nudged her palm with his nose. The tiniest smile flickered across Hannah's face. For half an hour, Rachel watched as Hannah and Dexter circled each other. Tentative, awkward, each step a test of trust. Hannah dropped a treat. Dexter took it, tail wagging. With each gentle touch, Hannah's confidence grew, and so did Dexter's. By the end, Hannah was stroking his back, talking quietly about her old dog, Max. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. She looked at the Walshes, saw the hope in their faces. She wanted this for Dexter, for him to have a family, a little girl to love him, a life bigger than a shelter or her living room. But when Hannah's father called Dexter, beckoning him to the car, Dexter hesitated. He looked back at Rachel, ears forward, trembling. He took a step, then stopped, pressing against her legs as if pleading for her to understand. Rachel knelt, her heart breaking and swelling at the same time. It's okay, Dex. You're safe, she whispered. She looked up at the Walshes. Sometimes it takes time. Maybe we can do a few visits, ease him into it? The Walshes exchanged glances, and Mrs. Walsh knelt beside Hannah. Honey, what do you think? Hannah studied Dexter, then shook her head. He's Rachel's dog, Mama. He loves her. There was a long, gentle pause. The Walshes smiled, real warm smiles that made Rachel's throat tighten. We understand, Mr. Walsh said. We just want Dexter to be happy, and it looks like he already found his family. Rachel's relief was so strong it almost made her dizzy. She hugged Dexter, burying her face in his fur. Thank you, she whispered, not sure who she was thanking, Dexter, the Walshes, or fate for bringing them together. Maria joined them holding another dog, a scruffy brown terrier who barked and wiggled until Hannah grinned. Would you like to meet Sadie? Maria asked. Hannah nodded, and within minutes the shy girl and the excitable terrier were tumbling through the grass, laughter ringing out. Rachel watched, her heart full, as the Walshes decided to adopt Sadie. After the paperwork and goodbyes, Rachel sat on the grass beside Dexter. The sun was setting, gold and soft. She ran her hands through his fur, voice shaking. You did it, Dex. You helped Hannah and you found your place. I think you're meant to stay with me. Dexter curled up beside her, pressing his head into her lap, breathing out in a deep sigh. Rachel understood finally what it meant to belong, not just to have a home, but to choose each other every day, even when it was hard. Later, Rachel reflected on how close she'd come to letting Dexter go, all in the hope of giving him the life she thought he needed. But love, she realized, was sometimes about listening, not just to what you want for someone, but to what they want for themselves. As dusk painted the sky in lavender and blue, Rachel promised herself and Dexter that they would keep making room for hope, for new beginnings, for second chances. She glanced at the shelter, full of barking and laughter and tears, and felt her heart open wider than she thought possible. In that moment, she wasn't just a rescuer. She was rescued too. Dexter became a quiet legend at Boulder Community Rescue. It started with small things, a new dog arriving, wild-eyed and snappish, and Dexter would settle nearby, curling himself up in a corner of the kennel, offering no threat, no challenge. Sometimes he'd barely look at the newcomer, but his calmness radiated through the space like warmth in a cold room. Rachel noticed it first. She was cleaning kennels one morning when she realized every anxious or withdrawn dog was quietly gravitating toward Dexter's side of the run. Dogs who'd arrived trembling, teeth bared or eyes blank with grief, seemed to find solace in the white shepherd's steady presence. Dexter never demanded attention, never imposed himself, but he was always there, a constant, gentle heartbeat that said, "You are not alone." One afternoon, a pit bull named Luna arrived, skinny, scarred, trembling from a life spent chained in a junkyard. Rachel and the staff struggled to get her to eat or even look anyone in the eye. But Dexter, as if sensing the depth of Luna's fear, approached her slowly, then lay down just outside her kennel, facing away, silent and unthreatening. Within an hour, Luna crept to the front of her run, lying down just on the other side of the fence from Dexter. By evening, she was curled up, head pressed to the gate, fast asleep for the first time since she'd arrived. Rachel found herself crying in the supply closet. She realized that Dexter wasn't just healing, he was a healer. His presence worked on people too. Volunteers began asking to spend their breaks with Dexter, just to sit in silence, soaking up the peace he projected. Even grumpy old Mr. Kim from next door stopped by with treats, confessing, "He makes the shelter feel like a home, you know." Rachel's own life began to open up as well. Inspired by Dexter's resilience, she reached out to old friends, inviting them over for coffee or a walk. Her house, once echoing with emptiness, now filled with laughter and voices and the playful barking of dogs. She hosted Saturday adoption days, inviting families and kids to meet the animals. Rachel watched as Dexter calmly greeted everyone, never overwhelming the children, always giving anxious dogs space. During one adoption day, a young boy with autism, previously nonverbal at the shelter, walked right up to Dexter, wrapped his arms around the dog's neck and whispered, "Safe." His parents stood in stunned silence, tears streaming down their faces. Rachel watched, heart pounding, as Dexter simply nuzzled the boy and let him stay as long as he needed. At home, the transformation was just as profound. Rachel found herself looking forward to the end of each day, not with dread or exhaustion, but with gentle anticipation. She made home-cooked meals, read books out loud in the evenings, and started journaling again, this time not about pain or loss, but about gratitude and hope. Dexter, sensing her moods, would press against her legs on the hard days and chase his own tail on the good ones, making her laugh out loud. In her journal, Rachel wrote, "Dexter has taught me that healing isn't loud or sudden. It's the quiet act of showing up, over and over, until trust is built and fear fades. He reminds me that scars aren't things to be hidden. They're maps, proof of what we've survived." She reflected on her own journey. The years she spent locked in grief after her divorce, the guilt she carried from dogs she couldn't save. Watching Dexter, she realized healing wasn't just about forgetting the past. It was about learning to see the beauty in scars, in trying again, in daring to love with your whole heart, even when it aches. Rachel became bolder. She organized a community event at the shelter called Hearts That Heal, inviting local families to learn about rescue, trauma, and the power of second chances. She spoke honestly about her own struggles, her failures, and how Dexter had taught her to start over, to trust, and to love again. The shelter was packed that night. Families signed up to foster, donations poured in, and a new sense of hope settled over Boulder Community Rescue. One evening, after the event, Rachel sat on her porch with Dexter. The sun was dipping below the mountains, streaking the sky with orange and pink. Dexter rested his head on her lap, eyes half closed, breathing slow and steady. Rachel stroked his ears and whispered, "You're the bravest soul I know, Dex. Thank you for showing me how to be brave, too." In that quiet moment, Rachel realized the lesson Dexter had given her. Real healing is a patient, nonverbal presence. It's being willing to sit in the silence with someone until their fear turns to trust. And sometimes, the ones who heal us most deeply are those who have survived the greatest pain. She pressed her lips to Dexter's head, feeling gratitude spill through her. "You saved me too," she whispered. "And now, together, we're going to save a whole lot more." The porch light flickered on. Inside, Rachel could hear the laughter of friends and the gentle bark of another new arrival, ready for their first night of hope. As Dexter sighed and relaxed into sleep, Rachel felt an unbreakable bond, one that had grown through wounds, patience, and the quiet, daily work of love. She knew, with absolute certainty, that this was just the beginning. Dawn broke golden over Boulder, sunlight curling around the frost-tipped grass as if determined to coax the world into warmth. Rachel stood on the steps of the shelter, a mug of coffee warming her hands. Dexter pressed contentedly against her hip. The shelter was waking up, volunteers arriving, dogs greeting the day with hopeful barks, the air buzzing with a sense of renewal. Today, the air itself felt different, lighter somehow. Rachel knew it was because both she and Dexter had finally arrived at the place they were always meant to be, not just physically, but deep in their hearts. Rachel often found herself reflecting on their journey, how two broken souls had managed to find each other and create something whole. She saw it every day, in Dexter's steady gaze, in the wag of his tail when new dogs arrived, in the laughter that once again filled her home. But this morning, as she sat beside Dexter, she felt the urge to share that journey more openly, hoping it might spark the courage in someone else. She'd been asked to speak at a local community event hosted at the shelter, a gathering of families, adopters, and volunteers, many of whom had walked their own roads of heartbreak and hope. Rachel was nervous, but Dexter was at her side, a living symbol of what could happen when you opened your heart. As the crowd gathered, Rachel looked out over the faces, some familiar, some new, all joined by the hope of second chances. She took a steadying breath and began, her voice quiet but clear. I want to thank you for being here, for believing that every life, no matter how scarred or frightened, deserves a chance to belong. When I first met Dexter, he was just a shadow. He'd been abandoned, hurt, left to run until his paws bled. I recognized that look in his eyes because I'd seen it in my own reflection after a painful divorce, after losses that left me feeling empty and afraid. But Dexter taught me something I never expected. He didn't need me to fix him. He needed me to stay, to listen, to offer patience and presence. Slowly, we taught each other that love doesn't erase scars, but it can transform them. It can turn hurt into understanding and fear into trust. So I urge you, don't just rescue others. Let yourself be rescued too. Open your homes and your hearts, not just to animals, but to the possibility of healing. You never know whose life you'll change, or whose love will change you. The audience was quiet, the kind of silence that hums with feeling. Rachel glanced at Dexter, who sat proud and calm, as if he too understood the importance of this moment. A little boy reached out to pet Dexter, and Rachel saw her old self in his tentative hope, a hand outstretched, waiting for connection. Later, as the event wound down, Rachel lingered with Dexter on the steps, watching the sky shift from morning gold to a crisp blue midday. Volunteers bustled around her, children played fetch with shelter dogs, and families filled out adoption forms. A sense of community, real and lasting, pulsed through the shelter. Rachel found herself in deep conversation with Mrs. Goldman, the neighbor who'd once seen Dexter chained in the old yard. He's different now, Mrs. Goldman remarked, scratching Dexter's ears. You both are. You can see it. Rachel smiled, warmth blossoming in her chest. I think we rescued each other. That night at home, Rachel sat on her porch with Dexter. She let her thoughts wander, searching for meaning in all that had happened. She realized how deeply their scars had become bridges, connecting them not just to each other but to everyone who stepped through the shelter's doors. She saw it in Mason's new confidence, in Maria's laughter, in every animal who learned to trust again. In her journal, Rachel wrote, "Compassion is a cycle. When we love those who have been hurt, we heal ourselves. The past doesn't disappear, but it becomes a map, one that leads us home to each other. Belonging isn't about having a perfect story. It's about creating a safe place where trust can grow, where forgiveness is possible, and where hope gets another chance." She closed her journal and gazed at Dexter, whose head rested in her lap, eyes fluttering with sleep. She knew they would face more challenges, new dogs with new traumas, the heartache of goodbyes, the never-ending work of rescue. But she also knew they were ready, that together they'd built a foundation strong enough to weather whatever storms might come. Rachel pressed a kiss to Dexter's head. We did it, Dex. We found our way home. The final image, a woman and her dog sitting on a worn porch, bathed in the soft light of dawn. Their scars, visible and invisible, had not vanished, but now they gleamed like gold, reminders of how far they'd come and what was possible when you choose hope. Rachel smiled, feeling a quiet peace settle deep inside her. As the world spun on, she knew their story wasn't just about rescue. It was about transformation, about love's quiet ability to make us whole again, one gentle act at a time. And somewhere, beyond the shelter, beyond the town, hope spread, ripple by ripple, inviting others to believe that belonging, no matter how lost you feel, is always possible if you're brave enough to try.